Okay. Hi guys, welcome to lesson 6.1, viruses. We're doing it a little bit different this time, but pretty self-explanatory. So our lesson objective is that students should be able to compare the structures of viruses to cells, and students should also be able to understand how viruses infect and actually spread inside of a population. So part one is going to be living cells, and then part two of the lesson is going to be about viruses themselves. Okay, so we're going to compare and contrast viruses and living cells. So this should be a recap because we've already done a lesson on prokaryotes and eukaryotes, but we're going to recap it because it's honestly critical to understanding all of biology for the rest of the school year. Okay, so it is a fact that all living things are made up of one or more cells. So you have very simple organisms that are made up of one cell, like most bacteria. Then we get increasingly complex organisms like you and I. Okay, of course, our levels of organization. An organism is divided up into organ systems. Those organ systems are divided up into individual organs. Those organs are divided up into many tissues, and each tissue is made up of one or more cells. Okay, so there's different cells, there's different tissues, organs, organ systems, and organisms inside of our body. We already talked about that, so I'm not really going to go in too much into that. Okay, so another fact is that cells, all living things are made up of cells, and all of those cells come into two different types. A cell is either a prokaryotic cell or it is a eukaryotic cell. Okay, so prokaryotic cells and prokaryotic organisms are going to be the first organism on Earth. They're very simple and small, and they cannot form specialized tissues. So prokaryotic organisms are going to be things like bacteria and archaea, okay? They cannot form specialized tissues, while eukaryotic organisms are very complex and large, and they can form specialized tissues. So for example, you yourself right now, you're looking at this video, you're hearing my voice, and you are seeing everything that is going on. Your nervous tissue, your nerves, your brain and spinal cord are processing information. That is a specialized tissue. Okay, because that's different from the fact that you have lungs that are actually breathing in and out, right? Lung tissue is a different type of tissue. Okay, so eukaryotic organisms, we've already talked about body systems in both plants and animals. So they form these specialized tissues. Okay, so again, prokaryotic organisms are going to be simple and small, bacteria, while eukaryotic organisms are going to be large and complex, you and I. Okay. Both of these organisms, all organisms that are alive, all living cells, all organisms that are alive, notice that I'm saying things that mean the same thing in different ways because you can hear them in different ways, okay? So the DNA is going to be free-floating in a prokaryotic organism. It's just free-floating in their cytoplasm, while in complex organisms like you and I, we have a nucleus, and that nucleus actually houses and protects our DNA. Okay, so again, this is just another picture. So this right here is a plant organism known as corn by us. Each of these corn pieces, I don't know what the different cells of them are, but basically this piece of corn is made up of millions, if not billions of cells, and inside of each of those cells, there is a nucleus that houses their DNA. Outside of the nucleus, but still inside of the cell, is the cytoplasm where all the other organelles are found. One thing that I also noticed that I feel like I didn't really say, I didn't tell you guys what organelles are. Organelles are just mini organs that are inside of a cell. Okay, so an organelle is just a mini organ that's inside of a cell. It's not part of our levels of organization because they are not alive on their own. The smallest unit of life is the entire cell. Okay, all of the organelles must work together to give the cell life. Okay, each organelle cannot live on its own. That's why it's not part of the levels of organization. Okay, mouthful. Breathe. Slow down. Okay, so then. As part of our organelles, of course, as with everything in biology, there's a simple version and there's a complex version. So we have the simple version, which are known as membrane-bound organelles, are complex parts of a cell. They are found in eukaryotic cells. So you are a eukaryotic cell. Remember that. So, for example, the nucleus, the chloroplast, the mitochondria, all of those are membrane-bound organelles. So we know the chloroplast is the site of photosynthesis. We know the nucleus is the site of DNA storage, and we know the mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell. Both. Okay. There are some other ones that we'll talk about a little bit later this year. Other organelles we'll talk about. So again, all living things are made up of cells. Remember, all cells are either prokaryotic or eukaryotic, depending on the organism type. So prokaryotics do not have membrane-bound organelles. They have no nucleus. They're very simple, while eukaryotic ones are going to have those membrane-bound organelles, and they're going to have a nucleus. Okay, so let's see if it's easy. Prokaryotes are just very simple. They have basically nothing. And eukaryotics are very complex. We have basically everything. Okay, let's just talk about the nucleus again. So picture that there's a big cell that we're not seeing. We're just looking at the cell nucleus anatomy. Remember that anatomy means the structure. Okay, the anatomy means the structures. This is the structure of the nucleus and all the different parts. Don't worry about needing to know the different parts at this level of biology. You don't. If you go to college, you will learn about the different parts of the nucleus. Okay, so again, the nucleus is part of a cell, and so it's an organelle. It is the protective compartment for DNA, and only eukaryotic cells have a nucleus. And that kind of makes sense when you think about it, because eukaryotic cells are very complex. There's lots going on. There's all these different body systems. DNA is having to do a lot at once for the entire organism. So it makes sense that they would have a protective compartment to protect that DNA, because, what happens if DNA gets damaged? DNA gets damaged, it could even be fatal, but it can be fatal. There we go. That's all I gotta say. DNA. Everyone knows what DNA is, I hope. I hope that if I showed you this double helix, this helical structure, it's a double helix that coils around itself. It is the instructions for building and operating the cell. And remember, all living things have DNA, even bacteria have DNA. That's how they are alive. That's how they were formed, using DNA. Okay, so again, eukaryotics and prokaryotic, I'm just really driving this point home because it's very important. Like I said, this is foundational for the rest of biology that we're transitioning into. So prokaryotic cells are going to have no nucleus, so their DNA is just free floating. This blue thing is their DNA. Boom. Whilst these eukaryotic cells are very complex, so they're going to have this nucleus that's going to contain its DNA inside of it. It's going to protect that DNA. Okay. The cell membrane, so around all living cells have a cell membrane, and that cell membrane is going to be what's called selectively permeable. And all that means is that it selects, right? Selectively means that it selects what is permitted, so what is allowed to enter. Some molecules are allowed to come into the cell and other ones are repulsed. They can't come into the cell. And the cell membrane's job is to do that. And we'll spend like 2 weeks on the cell membrane itself a little bit later. The cell wall is going to be a rigid barrier that surrounds the cell. That is not to be confused with the cell membrane, okay? The cell wall is a rigid barrier, while the cell membrane was selectively permeable, so it's very fluid. While the cell wall is that rigid barrier, it is not found in animals, but it's found in all prokaryotes. So archaea and bacteria are two prokaryotes, and then fungi and plants have cell walls. Fungi cell walls are made of chitin, while plant cell walls are made of cellulose. So just to recap, living organisms. So all living things on Earth are one of two. They're either prokaryotic or they're eukaryotic. Eukaryotes are complex and they have a nucleus that protects their DNA. Eukaryotes include plants, animals, protists, and fungi. While prokaryotes are very simple organisms that do not have a nucleus, and that includes bacteria and archaea, which are the prokaryotic organisms. Okay, this is all of life on Earth. Okay, let's do this practice problem. So some students used information they gathered from lab investigations to prepare this table, and they entered this table into their lab notebooks. We have cell 1, and then we have cell 2. Which of these correctly identifies the two cells listed in the table? So basically, you need to tell me, are they eukaryotic or prokaryotic? And go ahead and take some time to do that. Pause the video if you need to. Okay, so right there, that's all we need to know. Membrane-bound organelles, if it does not have it, then it's prokaryotic. Again, does not have a nucleus, prokaryotic. Is smaller than 5 micrometers, prokaryotic. Has circular DNA, prokaryotic. while this is going to be eukaryotic, is large, has membrane-bound nucleus, has membrane-bound organelles, has linear DNA, eukaryotic. So boom, good. Okay,